We are live in Studio B with your day-to-day BYU sports play-by-play. I'm Spencer Linton alongside Jarom Jordan. Joining us now is a national college football writer for CBS Sports. He is Shehan Jeyarajah. Great to have you on the show. BYU Sports Nation is understandably a little confused about where BYU showed up in the college football playoff last night, Shehan. So how do you see BYU at number 9, and what was your initial reaction to the Cougars in that spot?
Yeah, I was definitely surprised. I thought that they were going to be a team that maybe had a chance to be even higher. And when you look at the way that the playoff committee evaluated their resume, I think it makes even less sense, right? You have a team like SMU, of course, at number 14. You have Kansas State at number 19. These are two teams that BYU has good wins against, and yet they're behind a bunch of teams that don't have a single ranked victory. Actually, if you look between 6 and 9, the teams that are 4 spots in front of them have as many combined ranked victories as BYU has. And I just don't really get the logic behind this. Now, look, if you want to look at stuff like the advanced analytics rating system, stuff like that, like BYU doesn't rate as highly as other teams, but I think that when there's a 5-spot gap between a team like BYU and number 4 Miami, for example, who only has 1 ranked win at this point, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Is it star power? Is it explosive offense? Is that what's missing for BYU? Because BYU is a good to very good offense. They don't have a star per se, a bunch of very good players, but you don't have Cam Ward. You don't have the brand recognition of Texas and Penn State and Tennessee. Is it star power? Is that what's missing here?
Well, I think that BYU is an interesting team to try to evaluate in some ways. And I actually asked Michigan Athletic Director Ward Manuel last night on the media call, and he's the chair of the CFP committee. Why was it? What is the reason for this giant disparity? And he pointed to 1, eye test, which to me is a little bit of a cop-out, and 2, that Miami has an explosive offense. And I think it's just easier to tell yourself a story and a narrative about what Miami does well than at times it is BYU. I got a chance to talk to some of BYU's staff this past week, and that's something that they acknowledge. Like, we don't do one thing well. We kind of do everything well. We've had games that we've won with our defense. We've had games that we've won with our offense. We've had games that we've won with our running game, with our passing game, like everything. And to me, in a lot of ways, the ability to win games in different ways is a positive, but I think that it makes it more difficult for the potentially a committee member to say, hey, when I sit down and I think about BYU playing against Texas or Miami or Georgia or any one of these teams, what is it going to look like? Because BYU does something different every single week.
Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports is on BYU Sports Nation. Okay, Shehan, if you were to re-rank the college football playoff poll and you were the guy who was placing all of these teams in where you believe the correct positions are, where would you rank BYU amidst all the other teams that you've discussed?
Well, I do think that the top 3 to me is pretty set. When you're talking about Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, those should be the top 3. I think that if you wanted to, you could make a case for BYU as high as number 4. I'd probably have them somewhere in that 4, 5, 6 range. I'd certainly have them ahead of Penn State, a team that has no ranked victories to this point. I'd have them ahead of Tennessee, who has a loss to Arkansas that really isn't aging very well. The BYU-Indiana conversation is pretty interesting, as is the BYU-Texas conversation. I wouldn't fault anybody who has those 2 teams ahead of BYU, but I think that BYU certainly should be in that 4, 5, 6 range. And again, especially when you're comparing them to 1-loss teams, like, I really need to see a very positive data point outside of the loss in order to try to make a case. Like with Texas, at least you can say they've dominated everybody but Georgia on their schedule. They're winning games by huge margins. You can't say that about Penn State. You can't say that about Tennessee. And so I think that 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that range would have made a lot of sense.
Now we look at the rest of the season and like, okay, what's possible for BYU? Obviously, if you run the table and you win the Big 12, you're in. You're a 3 or 4 seed, depending on what shakes out in the ACC, you would think. Boise State creeping there at number 12. They don't have a game that look like they could lose. Upsets happen. But my real concern here is that there could be if BYU is undefeated, goes to the Big 12 title game, loses to, say, an Iowa State, a Kansas State, or a Colorado, that a 1-loss BYU team would get similar treatment to what they got last night, which is, I don't know, look at these SEC and Big Ten teams. Is there concern for Cougar Nation of the possibility of that happening, being a 1-loss Big 12 title game loser that doesn't get in the playoff, or am I crazy?
No, I think that's very much a possibility. And actually, when they came in at number 9, that was my huge concern with them, is I don't see them as being a sure thing. You look at Miami, for example. If Miami loses in the ACC title game, I think that that means that they would be, number 9 or 10, and the ACC would get 2 teams in. I don't feel as confident with that in the Big 12. And the other piece of this, too, it's not just whether BYU loses this game, but let's say, for example, that BYU drops one of the final 3 or 4 games before going to the Big 12 title game and winning. Well, would a 12-1 BYU that, by the way, has 2 top 20 victories be ranked for sure ahead of Boise State? Would there be a risk that BYU wouldn't even get that first round bye potentially that's given to the top 4 conference champions? So again, if BYU is 5 or 6, we're not having these conversations. This isn't at risk. And if you're the Big 12, you feel like, okay, maybe there is a pathway to getting a second team into the field. But between Iowa State losing last week and dropping all the way to number 17 and BYU coming in at number 9, I think that really the entire conference is in a much more precarious position than I felt like they would be whenever the first rankings came out.
Shehan, I'm looking at all of the teams above BYU, especially in those 4 to 8 spots, and a lot of those teams have favorable schedules moving forward. So naturally, I'm wondering, well, even if BYU wins out, how much could they actually jump up in this college football playoff poll if they do what they're supposed to do? Because outside of Indiana playing at Ohio State, are there any other pitfalls for the likes of Miami and Tennessee and Penn State and Texas even?
Well, and I think that when you look at the field, right, it's like Penn State is essentially already in. Like, they don't even have another losable game on their schedule. Tennessee plays Alabama, but there's also risk, by the way, that if Alabama beats Tennessee, or sorry, it's Georgia who plays them later in the year, like, you're potentially in a position where Alabama could move up, where Texas A&M, they play Texas later in the year, they could move up. So I think that while, maybe there are 1 or 2 teams who have a chance to fall from ahead of BYU, there's also teams that I think have a chance to come up and encroach, even as potentially 2 lost teams. So there is upside, certainly. I mean, again, when you look at Georgia, for example, they have to play both Ole Miss and Tennessee in the closing weeks of the season. Again, there are teams that I think are going to lose games, but it's probably only 1 or 2. And like you said, I don't think that there's any guarantee that BYU will have a whole lot more to climb.
It'll be interesting to see if the Big 12 can somehow get 2 bids. The ideal scenario is what we talked about. BYU wins out. They lose the Big 12 title game. Well, not for BYU fans, but for the Big 12. And then say an Iowa State or Colorado or whatever wins. Now you potentially get 2 in, but we talked about the possibility of no. But how fun has this season been? Because it's made the regular season even more relevant. The expanded playoffs been amazing. Is this the most fun you've had in a college football season up to this point?
Yeah, I think that it has to be. You look at the amount of upsets that have happened to this point. I mean, you look around the SEC, there isn't a single undefeated team remaining on the entire board. You look at the Big 12. I mean, it has been so different than how I anticipated. I had Iowa State certainly near the top, but for a team like Oklahoma State, for Arizona, for Kansas to have fallen all the way to the bottom, it has been one of the most unpredictable years that I've ever seen covering college football. And look, I think the other piece of this, too, when we go into a 12-team playoff is we have seen that there are not teams that are infallible. Like, Oregon is undefeated to this point, but they nearly lost to Boise State. They should have arguably lost to Ohio State. I think that there are going to be more upsets than people understand when we head into this 12-team playoff. It's really hard to play top 12 teams game after game after game. I think that we really could be looking at a wild finish to December and January.
He is a national college football writer for CBS Sports, Shehan Jeyarajah on BYU Sports Nation. We, I think, agree that BYU is probably the most undervalued team of the 12 that are currently in the projected bracket, Shehan. But who's the most overvalued team in that same instance?
I think it's Penn State right now, because you look at them, they have a 21-7 victory over Illinois, but Illinois is not top 25 at this point. They have a loss to Ohio State that's technically 1 score, but their only touchdown came on a pick 6. Like, that was not a competitive game that Penn State really had any chance to win. And you start looking up and down the rest of their schedule. A 33-30 win over USC. Well, USC's fighting for bowl eligibility. A 34-27 win over Bowling Green, a MAC team. like, what is the basis for them being in the top 6? I just don't see the vision for them right now. And again, they don't have more opportunity to continue to build on their resume as well, because they are very likely not going to be playing in the Big Ten title game, and they don't play any other quality teams for the rest of the season. I don't understand the logic of them being number 6, again, ahead of a team like BYU. I think even ahead of a team like Indiana, who's beaten everybody on their schedule by 2 touchdowns. And to me, like, I think that they are at heavy risk of being the first team to lose a home game potentially in the college football playoff.
That would add to the already weird resume of James Franklin, where he's very good, but still looking to kind of turn that corner. Had an opportunity last week. Okay, BYU takes on Utah this week. Certainly all this rhetoric around BYU is contingent on continuing to win. Cougars haven't won up in Salt Lake since 2006. How are you feeling about that matchup in a rivalry game that's now a conference game again?
Yeah, this is going to be such an interesting game because BYU should win, right? BYU is the better team, I think, almost in every aspect at this point. But rivalry games, man, you just don't know about them. And I think heading into this game against Utah, it's going to be incumbent on BYU to just play within themselves. Don't take too many chances. Don't make mistakes. And just try to play Utah head up, because BYU can win that way. I think the other piece of this, too, is that this is going to be a really big game for the BYU defense. If they can force some takeaways, especially on quarterback Isaac Wilson, I think that puts them in a really good position to win this game. Now, again, the other piece of that is going to be, like, Utah still has one of the better defenses in the Big 12. BYU is going to have to be effective down to down. They're going to have to run the ball at a consistent level. They're going to need to be consistent in the passing game. It's going to be a big Jake Retzlaff game, I think, and I think that it's incumbent on him not to turn the ball over. So I do have BYU winning this game, but it could get hairier than people expect.
Shehan, where can BYU fans find more of your content right now?
Yeah, you can follow me on all social media platforms at Shehan Jeyarajah. You can read all my work at cbssports.com. Make sure and check out my podcast, The College Football Survivor Show.
We need to say thank you for fighting the good fight on behalf of BYU.
Be outraged with us. Thank you.
We appreciate your insight and certainly your coverage of college football. Keep up the good work. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.